Good morning. This is Dr. Pucci and hosting the Root Cause Radio Solution Show. I always get a kick saying that. Thank anyone who is here listening and who listens on the recordings in our Facebook group, the Root Cause Healing Facebook group. So before we get started, I just wanted to, last week we did speak about the impact of the explosion of what we're seeing of Epstein-Barr virus post-COVID infection. All right, and just to kind of a quick recap, it was really about that the immune system's job, right, is to kind of protect us against things that are foreign, right? And also things that are toxic inside of our bodies too. That includes viruses and pathogenic bacteria, right? So there are certain kinds of viruses that are called latent, L-A-T-E-N-T viruses. That means they live in us, but they're dormant. And Epstein-Barr virus is one, herpes virus is another one, rotaviruses, cytomegalovirus. So we live with these viruses, and these viruses are often even passed down from generation to generation. So it's not like you have to catch it, right? It can be passed down. So we live with the viruses, but it's the job of the immune system to kind of keep it under control. But if the immune system is being distracted, if it's being distracted to fight a coronavirus, as an example, or if the immune system more so is being fatigued because it's fighting a virus, or it's just fatiguing because you don't have the right nutrients, or because they're stressed out, as it fatigues, it loses the ability to have surveillance. And then these viruses can kind of rear their heads and they come back and they can activate. And then we can have that. So we're seeing a lot of this reactivation of dormant Epstein-Barr viruses reactivating into their active form, and then leading to signs and complications of Epstein-Barr viruses. One of the most common causes, or signs I should say, is exhaustion. Okay, so it doesn't mean because a person's exhausted they have Epstein-Barr viruses, but it is associated with like mono. So again, Epstein-Barr virus was seeing a lot of that explosion. There were a couple of questions. Where's that sheet, Cynthia? There were a couple of questions that we were going to talk about. Some questions that came in. So yeah, let me just go back to just answer some questions that people were asking. So someone, it was a question, is a 29-year-old person who went to the emergency room for diarrhea. The doctor in the emergency room gave the person, this 29-year-old, Cipro, which is an antibiotic, and it says, and 3 weeks later, still has leg numbness. Is it a toxic issue? All right. Well, I don't know. I mean, first, and the question says still has leg numbness. So I don't know if the leg numbness occurred after the diarrhea or after they got to the emergency room. Then I don't know. Or has leg numbness been going on for a long time prior to this? I'm not clear about that. The Cipro is an antibiotic. So again, it's just like cookie cutter. You got some gastric issues. Let's just give you some kind of an antibiotic and maybe kill off some bacteria and see how you do. But I can tell you something very interesting. Is I personally, I'm just working with someone very recently in my practice who was on antibiotics back in April. Was given antibiotics because they had active COVID. Not sure why they were given antibiotics, because it's a virus, but they give them antibiotics. And then a month later, they were put on antibiotics again because of dental work, which kind of made some sense. It was pretty aggressive dental work. But it was interesting. We also ran a stool test, a microbiome stool analysis right around that time that person was actively taking the antibiotics. I didn't actually know they were taking the antibiotics. They didn't tell me that. So, but point is, when I got the test results back, I was shocked because 60% of the good, healthy bacteria that normally should be inhabiting the gut microbiome was non-detectable. Crazy. It was proof that when you take an antibiotic, that not only is it killing the so-called bad guy that it's going after, but it's wiping out all of the really good, healthy bacteria. So it's completely shifting what is called the gut microbiome into a poor negative state. And if you heard me talk many, many times again, right, your gut microbiome, right, is the precipice of your immune system. These bacteria control hormones, they control the production of vitamins, they regulate your neurotransmitters, they turn on enzymes, and they literally turn on and turn off your gene expression. So this is why antibiotics, should not be the go-to answer for everything, right? So in this person's case, I don't know specifically to give you the answers about the leg numbness, but I would say that, as I'm saying to you, is that the consideration as being on Cipro is, what the real question is, what was really causing the diarrhea in the first place? So I don't really know that, if it was an ongoing problem or if it was an acute response, right? If it's an acute response, like all of a sudden there's just explosive diarrhea in a short period of time, you're thinking about some type of an infection, be it viral or parasitic or something of that nature. If there's a long history of diarrhea, that needs further investigation. Another question is, my husband sprayed the yard, or had it sprayed, I should say, with pesticides, not for pests, with pesticides. And I've had headaches for 3 days since. What is that? What does it mean? Well, if your headaches are definitely uh, happening literally after the association of the chemicals being sprayed, that is a chemical toxicity load. Absolutely. Um, that being said, um, I guess the question would be is like, I'm sure this is not the first time the property was sprayed with the pesticides. Um, so there is a degree of what we call bioaccumulations of toxins in the body, which is why we always emphasize how important the body's detoxification pathways are working, right? The liver is the main detoxification organ, but it doesn't work in isolation, right? It's a whole system, right? Your respiratory system, your lymphatic system, your gut, your liver, your gallbladder, your kidneys, all of these things working in orchestration to help remove toxins from the environment and toxins that are made inside of our bodies. And so, this detoxification system from time to time needs a little bit more support. But certainly the chemicals that are being sprayed, it could be a variation of what types of toxins they use, what types of pesticides. It could be the amount of the pesticides, but obviously you're having some kind of exposure to that, and your detoxification pathways, one, are not clearing that out efficiently, right? And also there is also in regards some immune response to those toxins, that is leading to the headaches, right? So that needs a little bit more further investigation. Are there any other questions that were coming in? All right, so what I want to do right now is I do want to talk to you a little bit about this coronavirus and about the variants, about the spike proteins, about the antibodies, because I am getting this question a lot in practice with patients that I'm seeing. So this is a question that I've heard, or thoughts about this concept numerous times. So I thought it would be a good place to begin to discuss this a little bit. So first, I want you to understand, many people have often asked or stated that, an argument about should I get vaccinated, not get vaccinated, how's a vaccination going to deal with a virus? Because they'll say that a virus is not living, right? A lot of people argue that a virus is not living. All right. And that is arguably true, because a virus does not reproduce. It replicates, but it does not reproduce. Bacteria reproduce, right? So it's argued that a virus, from that language, is not actually living entity. So how could the immune system react to the virus, right? And so my clarification is, what your immune system reacts to are proteins. They could be food proteins, they could be proteins from the environment, right? And they can even be your own self-protein, self-tissue, which is what autoimmunity is, right? But your immune system reacts to proteins. Now, what does the virus have? What does the virus use to get inside your cells? It uses what is called spike proteins. So there it is. It's a spike protein. So what the immune system reacts to is not the virus per se, it reacts to the spike proteins. Now, what are the spike proteins? The spike protein, the protein is what the virus is using to lock onto a protein receptor on a cell. And these cells are mostly in the lungs and in the digestive tract. So that's the primary entrance for the virus, through the lungs and through the GI system. by the protein locking onto these specific receptors. When it locks onto the receptor, then the virus can enter inside your cell. That's the first thing. Another argument people make about the messenger RNA vaccination specifically is their concern is, I don't know, is this thing going to screw up my genes? I don't know anything about this yet, and I don't trust that the messenger is not going to get to my genes and manipulate my genes. When we discussed in the past, it doesn't, because it only hangs around for a really short period of time and it disintegrates. Basically, it's attacked by enzymes, right? It's just information, okay? Um, but but my point is what is the virus doing? The virus, when it comes inside your cell, right, it integrates itself with your DNA. That's what it's actually doing, right? And then it's reconfiguring the DNA and using your DNA to replicate itself. So it's replicating itself 1,000-fold inside your cells, to the point that your cells can't hold the virus, and the cell bursts open and it releases tens of thousands of viruses that now can quickly infiltrate with those protein receptors other cells, and that's the spreading of it. So again, if you get the virus, it's manipulating your genes. That's the first thing, right? But the messenger RNA is giving instructions. It's an instruction sheet. So your genes, your DNA takes that instruction, and your genes make proteins. So it's telling your genes to make the spike protein, the exact same spike protein that the virus is using. So this way, your genes make this protein. When enough of these proteins are made, they are expressed on the surface of the cell, and your immune system sees that and says that's different. That's something I haven't seen it before. So your immune system manufactures antibodies intentionally against these made spike proteins. So what's happening is now you have the antibodies targeted specifically to these proteins. So if in the future you get exposed to the virus and the virus gets access and it actually comes in, these antibodies have already been produced. They're already there. And they can then lock on to those the spike proteins, and neutralize them. So what that does is it limits the virus from locking onto your cell. So the virus can't get into your cell and start replicating. That is the purpose of making these antibodies. It happens naturally if you get the infection, but the intention of the vaccination, specifically the messenger RNA, is to manufacture those proteins. That is what the intention is. Okay. I'm not going to get into this part because I did explain to you the differences about the antibodies and how they're made. If you get the infection, the antibodies are made a little bit differently. They're made outside the germinal center of the plasma cell that makes the antibodies. A little unusual, because usually the antibodies are made inside the plasma cell. So the infection, they're made outside the plasma cell, and that's seemingly been associated with a higher risk of those antibodies cross-reacting with self-tissue, which is why post-COVID there seems to be an explosion of autoimmunity triggered by that cross-reactivity. The antibodies that are made intentionally by the vaccination, it's been shown those antibodies are being made inside the plasma cell, so they're more specific, and there's less cross-reaction with self-tissue. It's kind of a better scenario. Okay, next part of the equation. What are we dealing with now? We're dealing with a variant. In fact, we're dealing with two variants. So the first variant began in India, and now there's the second wave of it now, the Delta variant, right? It gets spread through Europe, and now in the United States is the Delta variant. So what does that actually mean? So it means the variant or the change, the mutation is happening on the spike protein, right? So the variant, the change is how the virus can get into your cell. So there has been, I think, there's been like on that spike protein, there's been shown to be 8 mutations, 2 of them specific to how it binds on to the cell's receptor. So what does that mean for people that have been vaccinated? What does that mean for people that have gotten the virus in the past, right? So yes, there still is some protection there, excuse me, There still is some protection there, right? But to what degree? So I think that some of the studies are showing us now that it's like in people that have been vaccinated, fully vaccinated, fully vaccinated, that they are having about 50% of the antibodies able to bind to the spike protein. But the variation is enough that there still is plausible entry inside the cell. So it's not a foolproof, right? If a person got the infection and they got the infection early on, right, the studies are showing us that the antibody count probably diminished over the course of the year. And so those antibody counts are going to be low, and they're going to still be at a higher risk for, again, infection from the variant. So there is no foolproof because of the variant now, right? And so the problem with the variant is because it's been taking so long for people to either get infected or to get vaccinated, is that there's still a lot of people, 50% of the country that is not vaccinated, okay, or fully vaccinated. So those people, get infected even if they have mild symptoms and still allow the virus to mutate. So that's why it was an exercise in speed, right? So the longer it's taking people to have, immunity, whether from an infection or from the vaccination, right, it's giving the virus more time to mutate, right? And the new mutation, the virus is becoming more stealth. It's becoming stronger. It's becoming more aggressive, right? It's able to spread faster. It's able to enter and replicate faster. So it's a stronger variation than the original virus we faced a year or so, year and a half ago, unfortunately, right? So it still stands to reason, in my opinion, that you still have the upper hand, right, if you are fully vaccinated. That's why I personally chose to get vaccinated. Now, I'm not, people who don't want to get vaccinated, it's fine. I'm just here to present information, right? And that's, in some of it's my opinion, obviously, but that's the world that we're living in. So so I want you to understand again that um, the antibodies are intended to block the spike protein that the cell uses to enter inside your cell. Now, what does that got to do with spreadability? I've heard a lot of misconceptions on that too. In fact, someone yesterday was saying, and I had to say, no, that's not correct, right? Um, if a person is vaccinated, do they spread it as easily? Well, what it is that if a person is vaccinated, fully vaccinated, right, and their immune system is healthy and robust, that's the other part, right, is they have the antibodies to lock on to those spike proteins so they can't enter. So it diminishes what we call the viral load. So the viral load, the amount, the quantity of those viruses is going to be less because their immune system is more robust, right? And they can clear the virus out. So they're carrying less. If they're carrying less, there's less to spread, right? When people get infected, the virus is replicating. There's a higher volume of viruses, right? A higher viral load. Higher viral load, there's more viruses to spread. That's why when people are not vaccinated and they're infected, their viral load is through the roof. They can spread it to a lot more people quickly. So if they're spreading the variant, even people who are vaccinated can pick up the variant and become infected. And you're seeing it. And you're seeing these ball players who've been vaccinated now are getting COVID because they're probably getting the variant, right? So the vaccination, if you're vaccinated, the intention is not to, it's that you can still get infected, but the real goal is to diminish the exaggerated immune response, right? So it's really to diminish the symptoms so the symptoms aren't as severe, right? And you don't get all the severe complications from the infection, but you can still transmit this. Is that helpful? You have any questions that are popping up from that?
No, I mean, I just still think that you could go back and talk about what the speed and the stealth
Okay.
issue.
Uh-huh.
Like can you go back and just touch base on? Well, I mean, I think that it's like been talked to death. Maybe you could just talk about the Epstein-Barr virus, the long haul COVID symptoms, like.
Yeah, again, so Cynthia's
Why does that happen? Just restate that.
why does the long haul COVID symptoms?
Yeah, I mean, I understand that it triggers the virus, so the virus weakens the immune system. Is that what it is?
So Cynthia's question is that does the virus, in this case, the Epstein-Barr virus, if that's happening, does that weaken the immune system? It's the opposite, right? It's the weakened immune system that allows the virus to rear its head, right? So again, what's happening is that when people are, um, if arguably 90%, and it says about 90% of the population has Epstein-Barr virus, right? Again, the job of an immune system is to control that, right? So when you think about people, when we hear about people, we say, the elderly people, people that are older, the elderly people have more vulnerability. Why? And they're talking about the immune system being compromised or being suppressed, right? The immune system, like any system, requires energy, right? Requires energy. Your immune system requires a lot of energy. So there's a lot of factors, right? I mean, if a person has an underactive thyroid, right, which impacts metabolism, an underactive thyroid is going to have an influence in saying an underactive immune system, right? Not enough energy, right? But the idea is your immune system. So even we talked about, I don't want to get too far into this, kid, but at a cellular level, we have mitochondria. And that's where you make energy at a cellular level, right? And so what we're seeing is that in society, we have so much what we call oxidative stress from the toxins in the environment, from the foods we eat, from the stress we live in. Right? And all these factors kind of pile up, and just kind of keeping it simple, it causes the mitochondria, the engines, to not work properly. And when the engines can't work properly, they can't make enough energy. And that includes your immune system. And so then your immune system doesn't have enough energy to fight viruses, right? It doesn't have enough energy to control something like Epstein-Barr virus because it's there, but it can't even control and fight in, the invading virus like the coronavirus. So if we get an infection like the coronavirus and you got to muster up some energy, your immune system, to deal with the coronavirus, it's starting to fatigue out, for lack of a better expression. It's fatiguing. And so it loses its ability for surveillance and to control the expression of herpes and Epstein-Barr viruses. What do you see collectively, right? When a person has, like, again, herpes is another common virus that people live with, lives in the body, right? And people get fever sores, which is a herpes simplex virus. And when do they get the fever sores? They get the fever sores when they are overly stressed, when they're not sleeping well, when their diet's not good. Why? Because collectively, those things are compromising energy and compromising the immune system. So the immune system can't keep the virus under control, and the virus rears its head, and it's seen as the herpes coming out as a fever sore. Right? So the Epstein-Barr virus doesn't come out as a fever sore, right? But it expresses it differently, and you see the exhaustion. Because one of the impacts, unfortunately, of Epstein-Barr virus is its impact. It impacts the mitochondria. So it actually causes more oxidative stress, which causes the engines in your cells to kind of break down, and you get into this spiraling uh, mitochondrial defect, lack of energy, and just kind of the wheels kind of fall off. So that's what you're seeing. You're seeing post-COVID what we call long haulers, and one of the most common complaints in people post-COVID is exhaustion, that they can't get out of it. I mean, exhaustion to the point of, I mean, literally can't function, can't get out of a chair, can't drive a car. I mean, and again, and then the brain, all the brain fog and things that follow with it, because the brain uses energy, but that energy system is being broken, and so then you have all these brain signs and symptoms. Okay, so
So yeah, one last question.
okay, another question.
We hear a lot is what is the difference between immune suppression and immune compromise? Because you're hearing about booster shots for immune compromised, and I think a lot of people get confused about immune suppression, and they think I have autoimmune disease.
So that's a really good question. What's the difference between immune suppression and being immune compromised? All right, let's try to verbalize this as clearly as I can. All right. Again, last week and the week before that, I spoke a lot about just the commercials on television, which are, we see, I mean, every other commercial is for a drug. And every single one of these drug commercials, whether it's for rheumatoid, for diabetes, for depression, for psoriasis, for gastric complaints, for ulcerative colitis, you name it. Every drug, as the commercial goes on, says, tell your doctor if you get fevers or chills or sores or tuberculosis or yeast infections. And so the reason why they're telling you that is because the drug itself is an immune suppressing drug. It is suppressing, pushing down the immune system. What does that mean? If you think about it, it means that it's telling you that these diseases, all of them, depression, rheumatoid, ulcerative colitis, eczema, psoriasis, they all have something in common. It means that they are all driven by an inflammatory response, an exaggerated immune response. So the drugs are intended to suppress that down, right? Short term, maybe okay, but long time disastrous because now you have a suppressed immune system, which means the immune system cannot respond when needed. So you can't respond to infection. So you're more vulnerable to being infected, whether it be yeast infections or more serious things like tuberculosis or viruses or actually even cancer. Because the job of your immune system is to identify cancer producing cells and go after it and quench it. But if your immune system is being pushed down, it's being suppressed intentionally with these suppressing drugs, it makes you more susceptible long term to cancer versus immune compromise. So an immune compromise means, I would really kind of say that as a, what's that? Well, an immune compromise could be like one, it could be a dysregulation in the immune system where you're not getting an adequate or appropriate immune system response at the right time, or you can't turn off the immune system. So for example, the complications with coronavirus, with COVID, in the patients who were having severe symptoms that led into the ICUs and the ventilators and eventually even died, right, is that their immune system is dysregulated to the point that the immune system can't turn itself off, right? So there's parts of the immune system that are compromised and not working efficiently to turn off the other part of the immune system that's driving the attack. So what you want is you want your immune system to identify the virus and have an appropriate response to the virus, right? So it musters up, let's just call it a inflammatory chemicals to attack the virus, engulf it, and degrade it, break it down, and clear it out. But that mechanism is driving what we call an inflammatory response. The signs of that is we get fever, we get the chills, our body aches, all these things are going on because it's using energy and stuff to fight that infection. But if there's compromise where the immune system, other parts of the immune system say, okay, enough is enough. You did a good job, let's dampen it down. If that's not working well, then you can't dampen that response. And that takes off and that continues to create more and more and more exaggerated inflammatory immune response. And it's that inflammatory immune response that's actually causing the progressive damage to the cardiovascular system, to the lungs, to the gut, turning on autoimmunity, all that kind of stuff. Did I answer that okay? I know it's kind of a tough subject to follow when I'm just verbalizing it without showing pictures, right? Pictures do help too, so you can see it. But your immune system is not this static system. Like no system is, right? It's dynamic, it's ebbing, it's flowing, it's being influenced by everything from your hormones to your gut, to sleep, to your diet, to stress levels. All these things have an emphasis in pushing on your immune system. And so what we are really looking to achieve, right, is we're dealing with the coronavirus, and we're going to deal with variations of coronaviruses, and we're going to deal with more viruses. That's just a world that we live in. We have Epstein-Barr viruses. So what we really want to be able to do is we want to start really learning more and paying more attention to how can we best support our immune system, and have a healthy, robust, properly functioning immune system. That's what we want, right? We want our immune system to identify things that are foreign, deal with it, calm down, go back to basis, and do all these different things, right? So, I mean, I'll leave it at this, right? Because, but anybody who's heard me speak before, and I was just saying to someone earlier this morning, right, is there's a common denominator. What we know today in our society, I'm going to read you something, but off the top of my head, but um, here's some studies or statistics, not statistics. This is at the end of July of 2021. So this is coming from confirmed cases at press time, July 31st, 2021, from the Johns Hopkins University Coronavirus Resource Center. As at the end of July, there have been 196 million confirmed cases worldwide, coronavirus. Okay, with the largest number of cases coming from the following countries. Leading the pack is the United States with 34.7 million cases, followed by India at 31.5 million cases. In third place is Brazil at 19.8 million cases, followed by France, Russia, and England around 6 million cases. 6 million cases in Brazil, 6 million cases in France, Russia, England, and Turkey, by the way. 35 million almost in the United States. Okay, Argentina, Colombia, Spain, Italy, and Iran, around 4 million cases. Germany, 3.7 million cases. I don't know, you know, why, you know, I mean, there's a lot of reasons for that, but it's just a statistic. I thought I'd throw that out there. But what do we have? My point to this, what do we have, right, is we have so many comorbidities, right? We talk about diabetes and high blood pressure issues, obesity, these things being such problems. These are problems, health concerns of modern society. And all of these health conditions have something in common, a common denominator. And that common denominator is all of these chronic degenerative conditions are all inflammation. There are inflammation, and that means they are all immune system driven. So all of these underlying health conditions, from diabetes, cardiovascular disease, obesity, which comes from the gut microbiome, by the way, right? Blood pressure, all of these things, right, are immune driven. So these things are already pushing your immune system and causing that immune system to be dysregulated, which is making us more vulnerable to the infection and leading us to more serious complications. All right, I'm going to leave it at that. It's kind of a heavy load, right? But hopefully it's shed some light and some interest there. Okay, thanks all for listening, and we'll see you next time. Obviously, if you are listening to this on the recording and stuff, just put your questions in so I can make next week's and the weeks following that, you know, more appropriate to the exact questions that are interest up to you, so I can answer your questions. And I look forward to doing that. Okay, thanks everyone.